Hi, hello, I'm Sam Harrison and I read, review and discuss fantasy and science fiction books. Today we have a kind of review discussion, I guess. You know what, we have all three. Today I'm going to be reading some chapters from The Wandering Inn by Pirate Arbor. I'm going to then kind of discuss those. I don't really review the chapters, I'll probably do reviews at the end of each book. I am not even halfway through. Almost, though. Almost. Halfway through the first book. Last week, I decided that I kept getting surprised by chapters that were really, really long. So what I wanted to do from now on is to look ahead on this word count website, which seems pretty accurate. It's just like it's just a Wandering in NeoCities page, but I'll be looking ahead and planning to read between 10 and 15,000 words, which is a lot of reading, but is possibly just about what I can get done in an hour. And I like to try and limit these videos to being an hour so that I can do them in my lunch hour and they don't eat into my daily life, as it were. So today we're going to be reading 1.27R, so chapter 27 R about Ryoka, and 1.28A, which I'm going to assume is another ant chapter. I love the ants, so I'm getting pretty antsy for that one. I don't know if I can find sound effects, but apologies in advance. So let's get straight into things and read 1.27, chapter 27 of The Wandering Inn, book 1. Okay, chapter 27 done. That was a really interesting one. So we have a lot of the cozy fantasy storytelling stuff that we get from Wandering Inn. So a huge portion of this chapter is about Ryoka teaching the fantasy people to make ice cream. It's really interesting that they get a wizard in to create the freezing spell so that ice cream can exist. There's a bit later in the chapter where she's like, I wonder what the ramifications will be for me creating ice cream, and that's kind of like a First Contact Star Trek style scenario. She's introduced this new thing to their society, or at least she's made it easy, and she's made it easy for them to make, or at least for Magnolia to make, as a noble woman with access to the resources, vanilla, which is apparently very expensive, and a wizard, so she can have ice cream whenever she likes, which is is quite fun, and it's we're also we spend a bit more time with Magnolia, and we learn a bit more about her lady abilities, which is really interesting. And so she's got this social class, or at least it seems to be kind of the main purpose is social skills with a capital S. But she's so not, we've seen a lot of martial skills, we've seen cooking skills. Interesting that running stuff. I don't really know how the running stuff is working with Ryoka, because I feel like in one of the chapters she says she has levels in running, but Erin can't gain levels in tactician for using her prior life on Earth. So she never levels up tactician, and I wonder if that's because, here's a theory, right? Maybe Erin already is a tactician and she's extremely high level, so all the stuff that she's been doing is just kind of accumulating experience, and is not the reason why she's not leveling up as tactician is because, in any game or anything like that, when you get to mega high levels, if you're level 1,000 or whatever, then you need to spend a lot more time leveling, especially when you're playing against weaker opponents be fighting against weaker opponents, which is what she's doing in world. So that's my theory, right? So Ryoka was a good runner on Earth, but not like she wasn't an Olympic athlete or anything. She was a hobbyist runner who enjoyed running a lot. So maybe she hit in world as like a level 5 runner or whatever, and she's been able to level up by just taking on harder and more dangerous jobs. But I think that so that's my big theory now. That's how Erin gets involved in all of the big epic fantasy shenanigans that people are talking about when they talk about this series. That's my theory. So Erin is like already a level 300 tactician or something. She's she's the best tactician on the whole planet, and that's going to be where the epic story comes from. But she still wants to run her in, so there you go. So that's my theory, okay? And that's kind of born out of mostly just thinking back on Ryoka chapters and not actually anything in today's chapter. Ryoka helps Magnolia to make the ice cream. We learn a little bit more about cooking stuff in The Wandering Inn. So we know cooking stuff from the POV of Erin, who is kind of learning about it from an outsider point of view. But in this chapter, Magnolia explains a few cooking things to, Magnolia and her cooking staff explain a few cooking related things like tools and enchantments for preservation to Ryoka. So that was really interesting, and it kind of, I feel like that's going to lead into Wandering Inn stuff, in that's where we're going to go with Erin's kitchen. And then, so we have, Magnolia discovers that Ryoka is, she asks as a joke, I don't suppose you're from another world, because it turns out that her and her group of lady gossips have been trying to work out where Ryoka is from and where the barefoot running that she does comes from. And they find out, and by just making a joke and saying, you're from another world, when it seems Ryoka may be under a truth spell while in the house or something like that, Ryoka can't say no. So she just says and Magnolia's like, oh crap, maybe she's from another world. So, and then her and Ressa have a little chat about it. Ressa's ostensibly her maid, but feels more like her bodyguard. And very interesting as well. And there's a little lore tidbit that I'd forgotten to mention that was dropped when Ressa and Ryoka have a quick chat while Magnolia's out of the room, which is she asks if Magnolia was a hero, because she's kind of regarded as a hero. What's the name? The Deadly Flower Blooming in the North, which is what her title is, or nickname or whatever. And Ressa's like, oh, you've heard about what she did in the Antimian Wars. She's not traditionally a hero, not the kind that they put on statues, but a hero she definitely is. Let me find that exact line, because I thought it was really good. Chat amongst yourselves while I do that. Not far off here. Here we go. So, Ryoka says, I heard she's some hero. She's the hero of some kind of war. And then Ressa says, the Antinian Wars, those are ancient history. She's no hero, the kind you'll see in statues, but she was. I thought that was really interesting. There's so much lore and so much backstory happening in the chapters here, and I think that the Ryoka chapters have been really good so far. I'm tempted to say better than the Erin chapters, but I like the characters in the Erin chapters more. It's just that I feel like there's a lot going on in these Ryoka chapters. We're getting a lot more world building, and we're being introduced to Magnolia, who seems like a much more a really important character. Then something interesting happens, which is that as Ryoka is running away from Magnolia's, she is surrounded and then attacked by the other runners. So last chapter we found out that she's been taking kind of more than her fair share of the quests that Magnolia hands out, for which she pays very well and always shares a little bit of her fancy food, and everybody is a bit annoyed because she's taken more of her fair share. And then on the final, as a final straw, she took one when she'd already had one quite recently. So the runners obviously decide to take her out, and what they do is they web up her legs and basically push her in front of a cart. And the last word in the chapter is all in red, crunch. So definitely something awful has happened to Ryoka. I feel like in a magical world where there's like healers and stuff, this is slightly less, and healing potions. This is like less stressful or thrilling or cliffhangery, because like Ryoka can't just like die here, and she can't stop being a runner because that's like her class. So yeah, less kind of peril, or like I'm less worried about Ryoka, but I'm very interested to see what happens next. Speaking of what happens next chapter is an ant chapter, and I'm going to start reading that right now. Hi everyone, so I'm back with my cat Barry here. Say, he can't talk, so he can't say hello. I finished chapter 28. Really enjoyed that one. It's taken me almost exactly an hour to read and record these videos, which is quite fun. But I'm going to still go through and chat about the chapter, obviously. This one was a shorter one, only 3,000 words. But this one is kind of like a few hours kind of from the perspective of Club, Senior Guardsman Club. Not really sure what his... I forgot. Somebody gave me a pronunciation guide. Thank you very much for that. I have forgotten it. So we get a chapter from his POV, and I really enjoyed the cool POV that we had before, and this one again, no different. And this, it's really funny because sometimes you'll read wandering in and you'll be like, oh, this feels like this kind of story, or this feels like this kind of story. But this chapter really felt very much like a proper merge of the kind of epic fantasy and also the slower, cozy fantasy stuff, because there's nothing in this chapter that is like dramatic, if that makes sense. But there's a lot of foreshadowing and there's a lot of, I guess, revelations here. So first off, Kulb is kind of in this emotional state that we've not seen from him before. He's like sad and angry, and it's because it's roughly 10 years since his hive was established in Liscor. But the hive, the hive was established in Liscor, and we find this out later on. But it was established to try and create more Antinium like Kulb, who are self-aware, and who I think he almost says have souls. Although I think we can see that from one of the previous Antinium chapters, it feels like that's already happening. But I guess they're kind of doing it in secret, aren't they? Like they're playing the chess in secret, and the two Antinium that kind of had that change in the previous chapter were kind of hiding it. So so I really liked this chapter. Basically at the beginning, Cole was kind of like, oh, I could kill my boss, I could kill Relk. How many of these guardsmen could I take out? And it's almost like he's lusting for a new Antinium war. And I think, let me find the line here. There was actually a line here. Here we go. He wondered when the third war would begin, and thought of killing them all. So very interesting, and it feels very. It almost feels out of character for him based on previous interactions we've had from him, and even the previous POV chapter, which didn't really feel like this. Maybe he's just having a bad day. And he does seem to be feeling better later on in the chapter. But the thing that the kind of change in energy from him caught me, and he shouts. It says it later, like that he screams at his fellow Antinium to like change and to do something, because they're like mindless drones. Although he's saying that basically they're mindless drones, and then sometimes they kick off and go mad and just start murdering, and become aberrations. That's the only thing that they've been able to produce in this score. And he's been like desperate to get some, like real kind of self-aware Antinium that aren't mindless drones. Yeah, there's a lot of Antinium lore going on in this chapter. We're also introduced to the concept of a Grand Queen that is kind of like in charge of his queen. Where there's also like a implication that there's other kind of like sentient worker ants like Kolb. Also that he's a worker, he's not a soldier ant, which is interesting, because he says that the only thing the Hive has produced is workers and soldiers, and then at some point he says his was the body of a worker. No, you don't like this video? Look at this tail swish, he's mad. He's mad as hell. So he doesn't like the new character stuff from Kolb. But yes, so this was also the big event in this chapter really is that Kolb, his colleagues in the City Watch have realised that it's his 10th anniversary of becoming a guardsman, and they give him a silver and blue badge to replace his metal one, his like tin badge that's kind of bashed up. So, sorry, the cat's trying to steal my snacks, my reading snacks. Stop it. So yeah, they give him this badge, and that they show that they trust him and they're friendly with him. And also, I'd forgotten about this, but he had punched Relk in a previous chapter, and he's kind of talking to his boss, and his boss is like, "Look, we all want to punch Relk. Like, don't worry about it." Which is quite funny. There's also kind of the implication that because he's Antinium, and because the Antinium seemingly may have gone to war with all other races, he's kind of singled out, and that he needs to make regular reports and have regular like one-to-ones with his boss. So yeah, there's so much in this chapter, and like I had heard the Antinium Wars mentioned. I mean, they were mentioned in the previous chapter, and the thing that I had been thinking before was that the Antinium Wars were like, some of the hives went against some faction, some country, and Kolb's hive separated from the Antinium and went to Liskor. But it sounds like the Free Hive is still working for the main Antinium, and they're trying to produce more Kolbs. Obviously, Kolb being able to level in the way that he is, whereas the regular workers and soldiers are only able to get to like level 5, which is apparently the level a child gets to. So they obviously want more Kolb so they can have more dangerous armies. And the chapter ends with him kind of like screaming at the chapters, screaming at the ants. But also a couple of times he talks through the chapter about how he wants to see Erin, he wants to have her food and her drink, and how it's kind of, there's a bit where he mentions that it was quite wasteful or frivolous to take all the ants there and do the chests and stuff, but he still likes doing it. and he was like, that's kind of like the bright spot in his sad life, which is interesting. But then the final line here, as it goes, that the day at last that his hive began to change. So there's definitely some ant stuff coming up. Be very interesting if we've been introduced to Kulb and he ends up being like one of the main villains of this series. If he's like, or maybe he like switches sides to be with Erin, and we have like Kulb versus his people. Although he seems attached to his people psychically and emotionally. So lots to think about, as always, with The Wandering Inn. Unfortunately, I don't have time for another chapter. The next one's another longer one. But next week I might be able to get 3 done, because we don't have one. So today the Ryoka chapter was quite long. It was like 8,000 words. So I wasn't really able to get to much else. But next week I think we've got 3 kind of like 5,000 or 6,000 word chapters. So maybe next week we'll be able to do 3. Thank you so much for watching. If you are enjoying these Wandering Inn videos, I put one up every single Thursday. The target time for release is 5 p.m. UK time, which is when I finish work, basically. But if you things conspire, I sometimes have to go to the office, so on those days maybe I'll either have to record in advance or release late. I did release late a couple of times, but I'm hoping not to have to do that so much. I really enjoy reading The Wandering Inn, and the thing that I really like about it is reading a few chapters every week. I feel like it keeps my main book fresh as well. If you're interested in what I am reading on the main channel, the other videos that I make, I have got a January TBR video now posted, so you can see what I'll be reading this month. The first book I'm reading is Eye of the World by Robert Jordan, the first book in the Wheel of Time. So this is the second longest fantasy series of all time in word count, where The Wandering Inn is the longest. I don't know whether it actually is the second longest, but it's the one that everyone uses as the comparison for The Wandering Inn, by going, The Wandering Inn is 4 times the size of Wheel of Time, or what have you. So really enjoying reading that book. So if you're interested in other stuff, there's other stuff on the channel. If you're only interested in Wandering Inn videos, I respect it, and I will see you here next week on Thursday for The Wandering Inn. Please remember to like the video if you've liked it. Drop a comment down below to tell me what you think of these chapters and what you think of my theories. My Erin theory, I think, is pretty strong. And I will speak to you next week. Goodbye.